The rusted gates of Maplewood Women's Correctional Facility groaned behind me as I stepped into the pale November light. After 12 years of concrete walls and fluorescent lights, the open sky felt almost suffocating. My name is Margaret Thornton, though everyone used to call me Maggie. I was 50 years old when they arrested me for poisoning my husband. Now, at 62, I was finally free, carrying nothing but a worn canvas bag and an envelope containing $8,000 I'd saved from working in the prison laundry. $8,000. That was all I had left after my so-called defense attorney bled my savings dry with false promises of appeals that never came. The rest went to storage fees for the few belongings I couldn't bear to part with. My daughter had stopped visiting after the 3rd year. My friends had scattered like autumn leaves. I was alone in a world that had moved on without me. The memories of that terrible night still haunted me. 12 years ago, my husband Robert collapsed at our dinner table. I called 911, performed CPR, did everything I could, but when the paramedics arrived, he was already gone. The autopsy found traces of antifreeze in his system. And because I was a former pharmacy technician, because we'd had arguments about money, because his life insurance policy was worth $500,000, Detective Morrison decided I was guilty before the investigation even began. The evidence was circumstantial at best. A bottle of antifreeze in our garage that every household in Ohio has. My fingerprints on his coffee cup, naturally, since I made his coffee every morning. Testimony from neighbors about our occasional loud arguments. My public defender, fresh out of law school and overwhelmed with cases, barely put up a fight. 12 years for second-degree murder. I remember screaming that I was innocent, that I loved Robert despite our problems, but the jury had already made up their minds. In prison, I learned to survive. I worked, I read, I kept my head down. My cellmate for the first 5 years was a woman named Dorothy, a 70-year-old grandmother serving time for embezzlement. She became my anchor in that dark place. Maggie, she would tell me, innocence has a way of surfacing. Like cream rising to the top. You just have to be patient and ready when it does. Dorothy passed away in her sleep during my 8th year. Cancer that the prison doctors caught too late. Before she died, she gave me a small silver cross on a chain. When you get out, she whispered, go to Robert's grave. Not to mourn him, but to find peace with the past. Only then can you move forward. Now, standing at the bus stop outside the prison, I clutched that same cross in my pocket. The bus driver, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes, didn't ask questions when I told her where I was going. Millbrook Cemetery, she confirmed. That's about 2 hours from here. You take care of yourself, honey. I watched the Ohio countryside roll by through the grimy window. Bare trees, brown fields, small towns that looked exactly as I remembered them. The world had changed in 12 years. People walked around staring at phones that looked like tiny televisions. Cars were sleeker, quieter, but the land remained the same. At the Millbrook bus station, I transferred to a local route that took me within walking distance of the cemetery. I stopped at a small flower shop first. The young woman behind the counter tried not to stare at my outdated clothes and prison-pale skin. White roses, I said, 6 of them. For a grave. I'm sorry for your loss, she replied automatically. I didn't correct her. How could I explain that I wasn't sure what I felt anymore? Grief? Anger? Confusion? All of it, tangled together like old Christmas lights. Millbrook Cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking the town where Robert and I had spent 15 years of marriage. The afternoon sun was already beginning to fade as I walked through the wrought iron gates. An older man in coveralls was raking leaves near the maintenance shed. He looked up, nodded, and went back to his work. Robert's grave was in the eastern section, beneath a large oak tree that had probably been there for a century. The headstone was simple gray granite. Robert James Thornton, beloved husband and brother. The dates of his birth and death. Beloved husband. I almost laughed. We had loved each other once, truly and deeply. But the last few years of our marriage had been difficult. Robert's construction business was failing. He'd become secretive, irritable, sometimes staying out until midnight without explanation. I suspected an affair. I found out later it was something else entirely, but by then, I was already behind bars. I knelt on the cold ground and began pulling weeds that had grown around the headstone. No one had tended this grave in a long time. Robert's brother Vincent had promised to look after it, but Vincent had his own problems. Gambling debts, I'd heard through the prison grapevine. A messy divorce. The kind of chaos that makes people forget their obligations to the dead. I was so focused on clearing the weeds that I didn't notice I was being watched until a small voice spoke behind me. "Are you the lady who killed the man in that grave?" I turned around slowly. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, stood about 10 feet away. He had sandy brown hair that needed cutting and serious blue eyes that seemed too old for his young face. He was wearing a puffy winter jacket and rubber boots. "I didn't kill anyone," I said quietly. "Who are you?" "Ethan. I live here. Well, not here. In the house by the gate. My grandpa is the caretaker." He pointed toward the shed where I'd seen the older man. He told me about the graves. He knows everybody who's buried here and how they died. He said you were in prison. I was, but I didn't do what they said I did. The boy seemed to consider this carefully. Then he took a few steps closer. "My mom says sometimes people go to jail even when they didn't do anything wrong. She watches a lot of those crime shows on TV. Your mom is right. It happens more than people think." Ethan moved closer still, until he was standing right beside me. He looked down at Robert's grave with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Ma'am, can I tell you something? But you have to promise not to tell my grandpa I said anything." He told me to mind my own business about cemetery stuff. My heart began to beat faster, though I couldn't have explained why. "I promise." The boy leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That grave is empty. The men came and took everything out. I saw them." I stared at him. "What do you mean? Empty? What men?" "It was maybe 2 years ago. In the summer. I couldn't sleep because it was too hot, and I looked out my window and saw lights over here. 2 men with shovels and a black truck. They dug up the grave and took out the box and put it in the truck and drove away. Then they filled the hole back up." "Did you tell your grandfather?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "He said I was dreaming, but I wasn't dreaming. I know what I saw. And the next day, I came to look, and the dirt was all different. Fresh dirt, not old dirt. I'm not stupid. I know the difference." My hands were trembling. If what this child was saying was true, someone had exhumed Robert's body without authorization. But why? What could possibly be worth digging up a 12-year-old grave? "Ethan, this is very important. Did you see what the men looked like?" "It was dark, but one of them was tall and skinny. The other one was shorter with a big belly, and the tall one had a weird voice, like he was from somewhere else. Not from Ohio. A weird voice? Like an accent? Yeah, like those guys in the movies who say, y'all a lot. A southern accent. That was something. Not much, but something." "And you're absolutely sure it was this grave? This exact one?" The boy pointed at the headstone. "I remember the name. Thornton. Like the street where my cousin lives. Thornton Avenue." I sat back on my heels, my mind racing. Someone had gone to considerable trouble and risked to dig up my husband's remains. This wasn't a random act of grave robbery. This was planned, deliberate, purposeful. "Ethan! Get over here!" The older man from the shed was walking toward us, his face tight with concern. Ethan immediately stepped back. "I gotta go. Don't tell him what I told you, okay?" Before I could respond, he was running toward his grandfather. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees as the caretaker approached. "I apologize if my grandson was bothering you, ma'am." His voice was gruff but not unkind. He doesn't know when to keep quiet sometimes. "He wasn't bothering me. He's a sweet boy. I'm Margaret Thornton. This is my husband's grave." The caretaker's expression shifted slightly. Recognition, maybe, or wariness. "Harold Brennan. I've been the caretaker here for about 6 years now. Took over after old Mr. Jameson retired." He paused. "I heard about your case, saw it on the news back when it happened. Then you know I was convicted. But I didn't do it, Mr. Brennan. I spent 12 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit." He studied me for a long moment. Whatever he saw in my face must have convinced him of something, because his posture relaxed slightly. "It's not my place to judge, ma'am. I just take care of the grounds and the graves. Speaking of which, I should mention that your husband's plot had some maintenance issues a while back. Drainage problems. We had to do some work on it." If the ground looks a little uneven, that's why. Drainage problems. A convenient explanation for disturbed earth. I filed that away for later. Mr. Brennan, I don't have anywhere to stay tonight. I don't suppose you know of any cheap motels nearby? There's the Riverside Inn about a mile down the road. It's not fancy, but it's clean. Tell Martha at the front desk that Harold sent you. She might give you a discount. I thanked him and gathered my roses, placing them carefully at the base of Robert's headstone. As I walked toward the cemetery gates, I felt Ethan's eyes on me from the window of the caretaker's cottage. That boy had given me something I hadn't had in 12 years. Hope. And questions that demanded answers. The Riverside Inn was exactly as Harold described, not fancy, but clean. Martha, a plump woman in her 60s with gray-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, took one look at me and seemed to understand. Harold called ahead, she said. Room 12. $40 a night, breakfast included. How long are you staying? I'm not sure yet. A few days, at least. Pay as you go then. No credit card needed. I settled into the small room with its floral bedspread and ancient television. For the first time in 12 years, I had privacy, a door I could close and lock, a window that looked out on trees instead of concrete. I sat on the bed and allowed myself to cry, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and confusion, and the strange, terrifying freedom of having no idea what came next. The next morning, I began my investigation. The Millbrook Public Library had computers available for public use, and a patient librarian named George, who helped me navigate the internet. I was searching for any news related to Robert's death, his business, his associates. What I found made my blood run cold. 6 months after my conviction, Robert's construction company, Thornton Brothers Construction, was investigated for insurance fraud. The company had been filing false claims for years, collecting payments for work never completed, for materials never purchased. The investigation revealed that Robert hadn't been working alone. His brother Vincent was the mastermind, using Robert's name and reputation as a cover. But here was the interesting part. The investigation was quietly closed without any charges being filed. According to the newspaper archives, key evidence had gone missing from the district attorney's office. Witnesses changed their stories. The whole thing just evaporated. I dug deeper. Vincent Thornton had declared bankruptcy in 2018, then somehow bounced back. He now owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. His net worth, according to a business magazine profile, was estimated at $15 million. $15 million. From bankruptcy to $15 million in 5 years, that kind of recovery doesn't happen through legitimate means. I printed everything I could find and returned to my motel room to study the documents. The picture forming in my mind was ugly but increasingly clear. Robert had been involved in the insurance fraud, probably unwillingly. He might have threatened to expose Vincent. And Vincent, to protect himself and the money, had eliminated the threat. But how? The autopsy clearly showed antifreeze poisoning. And I had been home that night. I would have noticed if someone else had been in the house. Unless I was drugged too. I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. That night, I had felt unusually tired after dinner. I'd attributed it to stress, to the exhaustion of dealing with Robert's moods. But what if someone had put something in my food, something that would make me sleep deeply, oblivious to whatever was happening in my own home? If Vincent had a key to our house, which he did, he could have slipped in while I was unconscious. He could have poisoned Robert's late-night drink, the bourbon Robert always had before bed. He could have staged the scene to implicate me. It was theory, not proof. But it felt right in a way nothing had felt right since that terrible night. I needed to find Vincent. More importantly, I needed to find out why someone had dug up Robert's grave. What were they looking for? What had Robert taken to his grave that was worth exhuming? The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days into my investigation, I was eating breakfast at the motel's small dining area when a woman sat down across from me. She was about my age, well-dressed, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that spoke of money and regular salon visits. "Margaret Thornton?" I tensed. "Who's asking?" "My name is Patricia Holloway. I was Robert's secretary for the last 3 years of his life." She glanced around nervously. "I need to talk to you about something." Something I should have told the police 12 years ago. Then why didn't you? Because Vincent paid me not to. $50,000 to keep my mouth shut and move to Florida. I took the money because I was scared and I had a daughter to raise alone. But I've carried this guilt for 12 years, and when I heard you were released, I knew I had to find you. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. All I saw was shame and fear. "Talk," I said. Patricia took a deep breath. Robert kept records. Detailed records of every fraudulent transaction Vincent made him sign off on. Names, dates, amounts, bank accounts. He called it his insurance policy. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should make sure those records got to the FBI. What happened to the records? That's just it. They disappeared. Robert kept them in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, but when I went to retrieve them after his death, the box was empty. Someone had cleaned it out. Vincent. I assume so. But here's the thing, Mrs. Thornton. Robert didn't trust banks completely. He always said you should never keep all your eggs in one basket. He made a second copy of everything. He told me he hid it somewhere no one would ever look. My mind flashed to Ethan's story, the men digging up the grave, taking something. He hid it in his own casket, I whispered. He must have arranged for the documents to be buried with him. Patricia's eyes widened. That would explain why Vincent has been so paranoid these past few years. He knew the records existed, but he couldn't find them. And then he finally figured out where they were. Everything was clicking into place. Vincent had killed Robert to protect the fraud scheme. He'd framed me to cover his tracks. And when he finally realized where Robert had hidden the evidence, he'd sent men to dig up the grave and destroy the documents. But had he destroyed them? Or were they still out there somewhere? Patricia, do you know who Vincent uses for his dirty work? Who would he hire to dig up a grave in the middle of the night? There's a man named Carl Hutchins. He used to do security for Thornton Brothers, a nasty piece of work. After the company dissolved, he went into private investigation, the kind of investigation that doesn't ask questions about legality. Where can I find him? Last I heard, he was working out of Cleveland. But Mrs. Thornton, please be careful. These people are dangerous. If they find out you're asking questions. They already stole 12 years of my life. What else can they take? Patricia gave me Carl Hutchins' last known address and phone number. She also gave me something else, a burner phone she'd bought specifically for this meeting. My number is programmed in. If you find anything, if you need help, call me. I owe you that much. After she left, I sat alone with my cold coffee and racing thoughts. I had a name now, a lead. But I also had a target on my back. If Vincent learned I was investigating, he would come after me. I had no doubt about that. I needed allies, people I could trust. My first call was to the Ohio Innocence Project, a legal organization that helped exonerate wrongfully convicted prisoners. I'd written to them from prison, but my case hadn't met their criteria at the time. Now, with new evidence emerging, maybe things would be different. The intake coordinator listened to my story with professional patience. When I mentioned the insurance fraud investigation, the missing evidence, and the possible grave robbery, her tone changed. Mrs. Thornton, this is exactly the kind of case we take on. But I need to be honest with you. Building a case for exoneration takes time. Months, sometimes years. Do you have a safe place to stay in the meantime? I'm working on it. Stay in touch. And document everything. Every conversation, every piece of evidence you find. The more documentation we have, the stronger your case will be. My next call was to Carl Hutchins. He answered on the third ring. Hutchins Investigations. Mr. Hutchins, my name is Sarah Miller. I'm looking for someone to help me with a sensitive matter. I was told you're discreet. Depends on the matter. What do you need? I'd rather discuss it in person. Can we meet? There was a pause. I'm booked solid this week. How about next Monday? My office is on Carnegie Avenue in Cleveland. Monday works. What time? 2 o'clock. Don't be late. I charge by the hour. I hung up, my heart pounding. I had no intention of hiring Carl Hutchins, but I did intend to find out what he knew about the grave robbery and who had hired him to do it. The next few days passed in a blur of research and preparation. I used the library computers to learn everything I could about Vincent's current business empire. His car dealerships were profitable on paper, but there were red flags everywhere. Unusually high employee turnover, customer complaints about bait-and-switch tactics, a civil lawsuit that had been quietly settled out of court. I also found something that made my stomach turn. 5 years ago, a woman named Jennifer Castellano had accused Vincent of assault at a company party. The charges were dropped when Jennifer suddenly recanted her statement and moved out of state. The pattern was familiar. Vincent made problems disappear, with money, with threats, with whatever it took. On Saturday, I returned to the cemetery. Harold was trimming hedges near the entrance. He nodded at me but didn't stop his work. I walked to Robert's grave and stood there for a long time, thinking, "I'm going to find out the truth," I said quietly to the empty grave. "Whatever it takes. You're back." Ethan had appeared beside me, silent as a ghost. The boy had a talent for sneaking up on people. "I wanted to ask you something, Ethan. The men you saw that night, the ones who dug up this grave, did you see what they took out of it?" He scrunched up his face, remembering. It was a box. Not the big box, the coffin. A smaller box, like a shoebox but metal. They put it in a bag and took it to their truck. A metal box. Exactly what you'd use to protect important documents from moisture and decay. "Did you see where they went? Which direction?" "They drove toward town. That's all I know." He paused. "Are you going to catch them? The bad men?" "I'm going to try." "Good. I don't like people who dig up graves. It's disrespectful. These people are supposed to rest in peace, and how can they rest if someone keeps bothering them?" I smiled despite everything. "You're a wise kid, Ethan. Your grandfather is lucky to have you." The boy beamed, then ran off toward the cottage, his boots squelching in the muddy grass. Monday came faster than I expected. I dressed carefully, choosing the most professional-looking clothes I'd managed to buy at a thrift store. Navy blue slacks, a cream-colored blouse, a gray cardigan. I looked like someone's grandmother, which I supposed I was, though I'd never met my daughter's children. She'd made sure of that. Carl Hutchins' office was in a run-down building on the edge of Cleveland's warehouse district. The elevator smelled like cigarettes and despair. His door was at the end of a dim hallway, the frosted glass panel bearing his name in faded gold letters. I knocked. "It's open." Hutchins was exactly what I expected. Mid-50s, gone to seed, with the bloodshot eyes of a man who drinks his lunch. His office was cluttered with papers and file boxes. A framed photograph on the wall showed him in a Thornton Brothers construction uniform, shaking hands with a younger Vincent. "Mrs. Miller, I presume. Have a seat." I sat in the cracked leather chair across from his desk. "Thank you for seeing me. What can I do for you?" I had prepared a story. A fictional cheating husband, a need for surveillance. But as I looked at Carl Hutchins, at the greed in his small eyes and the cruelty in the set of his mouth, I changed my mind. Sometimes the direct approach works better. "Actually, Mr. Hutchins, my name isn't Sarah Miller. It's Margaret Thornton, and I want to know who paid you to dig up my husband's grave 2 years ago." The change in his expression was instantaneous. His face went pale, then red, then settled into something cold and dangerous. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. 2 men, a summer night, a black truck. You took a metal box from the coffin. I want to know where that box went." Hutchins stood up slowly. He was bigger than I'd realized, broad across the shoulders despite his paunch. "Lady, you need to leave. Right now." "Or what? You'll kill me like you helped kill Robert?" "I didn't kill anybody, and if you keep running your mouth, you're going to find yourself in a whole world of trouble." "I've already been in a whole world of trouble. 12 years of it. What else can you do to me?" We stared at each other for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, Hutchins laughed. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." He sat back down. "All right, Mrs. Thornton. Cards on the table." "Yes. I was hired to retrieve something from your husband's grave. No, I don't know what was in the box. My job was to dig it up and deliver it, which I did." "Deliver it to whom?" "To a man named Marcus Webb. He's a lawyer out of Chicago. Works for various clients who prefer to remain anonymous. I never met the actual client, but you can guess who it was." Hutchins shrugged. "I can guess a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm right." "Vincent Thornton." His silence was confirmation enough. "What was your relationship with Vincent?" "I worked security for Thornton Brothers for 8 years. I saw things. I heard things. When the company went under, Vincent offered me occasional work to keep me quiet. The grave job was one of those occasions. And you never wondered why a man would want to dig up his own brother's remains? I stopped wondering about things a long time ago, Mrs. Thornton. Wondering gets people killed. So does keeping secrets. Hutchins leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. Let me give you some advice, free of charge. Walk away from this. Whatever you think you're going to find, whatever justice you think you're going to get, it's not worth your life. Vincent Thornton has resources you can't imagine. He's destroyed everyone who's ever crossed him. Lawyers, business partners, even family. What makes you think you'll be any different? Because I have nothing left to lose. I stood up and walked to the door. With my hand on the knob, I turned back. One more question. The box you retrieved, was it intact when you delivered it? Hutchins hesitated. It was sealed. I didn't open it. But you wanted to. Of course I wanted to. A box important enough to bury with a corpse? That's got to be worth something. But Webb was very specific. Deliver it sealed or don't deliver it at all. So the documents might still exist. What documents? Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. You've been very helpful. I left before he could respond. As I walked down the dim hallway, I heard him pick up his phone. No doubt calling Vincent or Webb to report our conversation. That was fine. Let them know I was coming. Let them sweat. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Patricia connected me with a journalist friend at the Cleveland Plain Dealer who was interested in corruption stories. The Innocence Project assigned a young lawyer named David Chen to my case. And through David, I gained access to something I'd never been able to get before, the complete files from my original trial. What I found in those files changed everything. The prosecution's key evidence had been the presence of ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze, in Robert's system. But buried in the medical examiner's notes was a detail that had never been presented at trial. The concentration of ethylene glycol was inconsistent with oral ingestion. The pattern suggested injection, not drinking. Someone had injected Robert with antifreeze. That required medical knowledge, access to syringes, and the opportunity to be alone with him for several minutes, none of which applied to me. But Vincent's second wife, before their divorce, had been a registered nurse. I called Patricia. I need everything you can find about Vincent's ex-wife, Caroline Marshall. Caroline? She left him about 8 years ago. Moved to Arizona, I think. They had a nasty divorce. Nasty how? She accused him of abuse, controlling behavior, financial manipulation, classic domestic violence stuff. But she dropped all the allegations as part of the settlement, got a nice payout and signed an NDA. Do you have any way to contact her? I might. Give me a few days. While I waited, I visited Ethan one more time. The boy had become my unlikely ally, a witness whose testimony might not hold up in court but whose observations had started me on this path. Ethan, I wanted to thank you for telling me what you saw. It's helping me find the truth. He grinned, showing a gap where he'd recently lost a tooth. Grandpa says you've been causing trouble. He says trouble follows some people like a shadow. Is that what he thinks of me? No. He said it like it was a good thing. He said some people need to cause trouble because otherwise, bad guys get away with stuff. I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. Your grandfather is a smart man. I know. He's teaching me to play chess. He says chess teaches you to think 3 moves ahead. 3 moves ahead. That's exactly what I needed to do. Vincent would be planning his response to my investigation. I had to anticipate his moves and be ready. The call from Patricia came 5 days later. I found Caroline. She's living in Scottsdale under her maiden name, Caroline Marshall. And Margaret, she wants to talk. She's been waiting for 12 years for someone to finally ask the right questions. Caroline and I spoke for 3 hours over a video call. She was thin and nervous, her eyes constantly darting as if expecting someone to burst through the door. But her voice was steady as she told her story. Vincent bragged about it, she said. Not explicitly, not in a way that could be used against him, but he would make comments when he was drunk, about how Robert had tried to betray him and paid the price, about how he'd found the perfect patsy to take the fall, meaning me. Yes, he hated you, Margaret. He thought you were turning Robert against him, encouraging him to go to the authorities. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's true. Robert wanted to confess everything, turn state's evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence. He was tired of the lying, the fraud, the constant fear of being caught. We had argued about it the night he died. I wanted him to do it. He was wavering. And Vincent couldn't let that happen. He had too much to lose. But how did he do it? How did he get into our house without me knowing? Caroline's face hardened. That was my part. God help me. I was the one who let him in. I felt like I'd been punched. What? I came to your house that afternoon. Remember? I brought over a casserole because I'd heard you were stressed. The memory surfaced slowly. Yes, Caroline had stopped by around 4 o'clock. She'd seemed nervous, distracted. I'd attributed it to her own troubled marriage. She'd only stayed about 15 minutes. The casserole was drugged. Not enough to harm you, just enough to make you sleep deeply. And while you were eating dinner, I unlocked the back door from the inside. Vincent came in later that night, after you were unconscious. He injected Robert with a concentrated solution of antifreeze. By morning, Robert was dead, and you were the obvious suspect. I was shaking, with rage, with grief, with the overwhelming weight of 12 stolen years. Why didn't you say something? At the trial, in the years afterward, why did you stay silent? Because I was terrified. Vincent threatened to kill me if I ever talked, and I believed him. I still believe him. He's capable of anything. She paused. But I've carried this guilt for so long. Every day, I think about what I helped do to you. I can't live with it anymore. Are you willing to testify? Yes. Whatever it takes. I've already spoken to a lawyer about witness protection. I'm ready to tell the truth. 2 months later, I stood in a courtroom as a judge vacated my conviction. The evidence was overwhelming. Caroline's testimony, the medical examiner's revised report, bank records showing payments from Vincent to Carl Hutchins. And the final piece of the puzzle, Robert's documents. It turned out that Marcus Webb, the lawyer Hutchins had delivered the box to, had kept copies for himself. Insurance, just like Robert. When investigators came knocking, offering immunity in exchange for cooperation, Webb had handed over everything. The documents detailed Vincent's entire fraud operation, from the earliest fake insurance claims to the offshore accounts where he'd hidden millions. Vincent was arrested at his home in Columbus, trying to shred documents even as the FBI broke down his door. He's currently awaiting trial on 37 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and first-degree murder. Caroline's testimony ensures that the murder charge will stick. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. The state of Ohio awarded me $2.4 million in compensation for wrongful imprisonment, $200,000 for each year of my stolen life. It's not enough. No amount of money could be enough. But it allows me to do something meaningful with the time I have left. I used part of the money to set up a scholarship fund in Dorothy's name, my prison mentor who taught me that the truth always surfaces. The rest went toward establishing a support center for families of the wrongfully convicted. We help with legal fees, housing, job placement, counseling, all the things I desperately needed when I walked out of Maplewood 12 years after I'd walked in. Ethan visits me sometimes with his grandfather. He's 10 now, tall for his age, and still fascinated by mysteries and secrets. I've told him that his courage in speaking up helped save an innocent woman's life. He seems embarrassed by the praise, but I can tell he's proud. Last spring, I went back to Robert's grave one final time. The headstone has been updated. Robert James Thornton, victim of betrayal, now truly at rest. I no longer feel anger when I stand at that grave. Robert made bad choices, yes. He got involved with things he shouldn't have. But in the end, he tried to do the right thing. He paid for that with his life. As I was leaving the cemetery, a woman approached me. She was about 40, well-dressed, but with the haunted look I recognized from my own mirror. Mrs. Thornton? My name is Karen Webb. My father is Marcus Webb, the lawyer who kept those documents. I know who your father is. He's dying. Pancreatic cancer. Before he goes, he wanted me to find you and deliver a message. What message? Karen handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words written in shaky handwriting. I'm sorry. I looked at Karen, at her tired eyes and trembling hands. She was carrying her own burden of guilt, her own legacy of family secrets and silent complicity. "Tell your father I received his message," I said. "And tell him that forgiveness isn't mine to give. He'll have to make his peace with someone higher than me." She nodded and walked away. I watched her until she disappeared around the corner of the maintenance shed. Some wounds never fully heal. Some losses can never be recovered. But I've learned that carrying bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. So I choose to let go. Not for Vincent, not for Marcus Webb, not even for myself, but for all the others who are still trapped behind walls, still waiting for someone to believe in their innocence. My name is Margaret Thornton. I was convicted of a murder I didn't commit. I served 12 years in prison for another person's crime, and today, I'm free. Not just free from prison, free from hatred, free from despair, free to spend whatever years I have left fighting for justice, speaking truth, and proving that no matter how deep they try to bury it, the truth always rises to the surface. Like cream rising to the top, Dorothy used to say, like oil floating on water. Some things cannot be kept down forever.